Alright guys, so if you're watching this video, you are probably someone who's about to go through student teaching or some type of practicum, and you are beginning to hear all this edTPA terminology being thrown at you, and you're feeling the pressure kind of weigh down on you as you approach certification and your career in the field of education. But the main reason I wanted to make this video is to kind of break down academic language, because when I went through the edTPA process, I started looking through the handbook and I saw words like academic language, discourse, syntax, language demands, vocabulary, kind of a given. If you don't know what that is, you should probably just quit at life. Other than that, you should be good. But when I went through that handbook, I was so intimidated. I was like, I probably heard a lot of these terms in most of my education classes, and it just kind of went right over me. So really the main purpose of this video is to really break down academic language, guys. When I went through the whole process, I feel like I kept getting different definitions from different professors, supervisors, mentors, you name it. So I hope that this video is really going to help you kind of solidify some type of definition in your head where you can pass this thing and get it over with. So, rock on. Alrighty guys, so let's go ahead and tackle the biggest question of all. So what is academic language? Academic language represents the language of the discipline, school, community, or culture that people must learn and use to participate and engage in meaningful ways. So long story short, basically academic language is the language of your content area or your discipline, okay? So if you're in social studies, you're going to have different academic language than someone who is in a biology class or someone who's in an Algebra 1 class or band. So you pretty much get the idea. So in each class, in each atmosphere, you're going to have your own kind of terminology that you're going to be throwing back and forth with your students. That is basically academic language. And really, it's a very broad concept. It can go from all the way to your home, all the way to the classroom. It just depends. Academic language is just the language that you use in that specific scenario or that specific content area. So I hope that makes sense. But that leads me to my next point. Okay, so you cannot participate in academic language without certain language demands. And that's what we're going to talk about today in the next point. So as I just mentioned before, you can't have academic language without certain language demands. First, I want you guys to go ahead and pay attention to the definition towards the top of the picture here. So, language demands are the way that academic language is used by students to participate in the learning tasks through reading, writing, listening, and or speaking to demonstrate their understanding. So, in order for your students to successfully engage in using academic language, there are certain language demands that you must have in order to do so, okay? And those come in 4 categories. First, you've got vocabulary. Second, language functions. Third, syntax. And last but not least, you have discourse, which we're going to talk about all 4 of these in the video today. So with that being said, we're going to talk about all 4 of these categories that are under language demands, okay? So the first one we're going to talk about is vocabulary. Now you're probably thinking, okay, I definitely know what this is, but let me just throw it at you and just make sure you have a solidified definition in your head. So if you take a look at the screen here, vocabulary words are basically key words or phrases that are used within the discipline. So if you take a look at your lesson plan, most likely you'll have a section labeled academic language, and this is exactly where you're going to put those key words or phrases that you and your students will be using and expressing during your specific lesson. Okay, so basically there are 3 different tiers or levels of vocabulary words. Right off the bat, tier 1 is probably the most straightforward of them all. So tier 1 vocabulary words are basic words that do not have multiple meanings. So when you hear, for example, book, girl, sad, or tree, you don't think of anything other than the word itself and what it means, because there are not multiple meanings for those words. Tier 2 is a little different. Tier 2 vocabulary words are words used across a variety of domains. For example, characteristics, analyze, compare, and so on. These words do have multiple meanings in different domains. And last but not least, you have Tier 3, which is probably the most quote-unquote intense of them all. Tier 3 words are specific to their discipline. So for example, you would have constitution, which is specific to social studies, but it wouldn't be a word that you would ever use in biology or chemistry. But in chemistry, you would use protons, neutrons, or in English, you would say metaphor, simile, and so on. Okay, so vocabulary, as you see, is very straightforward. You've been doing this for years and you definitely understand what it means, but I just wanted to make sure that you guys kind of understood what these scores are looking for. Now, let me say this. I don't know that edTPA scores are going to look for, a Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 vocabulary words, but it just might make your document look good if you go ahead and show them that, okay, I do know the difference between these vocabulary words, and just kind of throw that in your academic language section. It could be impressive either way. So I'd say it's always worth the try to make your document look even better. You never know. In order for your students to successfully participate in using academic language, they'll have to engage in using a language function, which again is one of the language demands. Basically, a language function is the action verb stated in your objective at the beginning of a lesson. And I put up a few examples here, and these actually come straight from the edTPA handbook. I'm pretty sure they're in all the handbooks. But for example, you've got analyze, examine, compare, contrast, identify, construct, interpret, describe, justify, evaluate, locate. So it's basically what your students are doing in your lesson. And we are at syntax. Okay, so I'll be honest with you, this is one that a lot of people seem to have trouble on. When I was going through the edTPA process, it was one that I really couldn't define in my own words at first, and when I would ask other people, everybody seemed to have this different definition of the word, and I just never really got a good understanding of it. So hopefully, when I go over this will make sense to you, and you can confidently use syntax, or use examples of syntax on your lesson plan. For the definition of syntax, guys, I promise it's really not that hard. It's just how you support students and their language use, okay? So any way that you support their language use, that is an example of syntax, okay? For the fancy definition, it's the set of conventions for organizing words, phrases, and symbols into structures. Basically, any type of language support you give your student where they can turn around and express that idea back to you in words or phrases, that is syntax, okay? Any type of language support. And the biggest thing, guys, is think grammar. So I've listed several examples down here at the bottom. The first one would be just sequence of events, helping your students recognize what comes first, next, and last, okay? Subject-verb agreement, structure of a sentence, such as length, word order, grammar, active or passive voice, and so on. Of course, graphic organizers, they definitely help support language use. Formulas, conventions, as we kind of mentioned earlier, spelling, grammar, and punctuation, charts, outlines, Venn diagrams. You guys kind of get the picture, hopefully. So it's just any type of language support that you give your students. In terms of lesson plan placement and where vocabulary, syntax, and discourse go, they are a little bit different, okay? So just like we talked about earlier, vocabulary is going to go in the academic language section. So any type of key phrases or key terms that you use that are important for your students to achieve the objective, those are going to go in your academic language section. But for syntax and discourse, both of those are considered language supports, because with syntax, you're offering language support and language use for your students, okay? But with discourse, we'll talk about that in just a second, that is also considered a language support. So again, vocabulary goes with academic language, syntax and discourse, they go with language supports in your lesson plan. Between discourse and syntax, I would say that discourse is much easier to understand than syntax, but hopefully you understand syntax at this point. But with that being said, discourse is how the students of the discipline talk and write in knowledge construction. It's how the students basically communicate their understanding, okay? So each discipline has its own way of communicating what they know and how they should know it. The question you really need to ask yourself, guys, is how will your students share and express knowledge? Okay, and I've got a few examples on the bottom if you take a look. Again, so discourse is how your students talk and write in knowledge construction. So examples of just talking during a lesson could be a think, pair, share activity, just a basic class discussion, asking and answering questions with your students, or a partner discussion. And really the list can go on for talking. Now on the other side, you've got writing, okay? A couple of examples of writing activities that you could have your students do is just write a reflection of some type of reading or reading prompt that you have them do. Write a poem, fill out a graphic organizer, write an essay, write a sentence, and again, that list can go on as well. So there you have it, guys. Those are the 4 different types of language demands in the edTPA process. Again, Each one of these is essential for your students to actually participate and engage in academic language. Alright guys, well that is basically the video I have for you. I hope that academic language kind of makes a little bit more sense to you. I know that we kind of lightly dove into academic language, talking about vocabulary, syntax, discourse, and language functions. I hope that this has kind of helped you solidify some definitions in your mind. If I can give any advice to you, it's really just to take edTPA one day at a time. Go back and edit your stuff, take a look at it, have someone else read it for you. When I say someone else, just like a peer or something, that is definitely not against the rules or anything like that. So really, from me to you, good luck going through this process, and I obviously hope that you pass. Good luck, guys.